1 year had passed since Prince Marcus's successful hospital visit, and the royal family had settled into a rhythm that balanced public duty with private family life. Marcus, now approaching his second birthday, had developed into a confident toddler with an infectious laugh and remarkable ability to connect with people of all ages. His vocabulary had expanded dramatically, though he still reserved his most enthusiastic dada calls for Alexander. On this crisp October morning, Alexander sat in his private office reviewing correspondence while Marcus played quietly nearby with his collection of wooden toys. The toddler had learned to entertain himself during his father's work time, but he preferred to be in the same room rather than with a nanny. Alexander had discovered that having his son nearby actually improved his focus and decision-making. "Dada, look," Marcus called out, having successfully stacked 5 wooden blocks into a wobbly tower. "Excellent work, Marcus," Alexander said, looking up from a letter about upcoming state visits. "You're becoming quite the architect." Marcus beamed at the praise and immediately began building a second tower, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration, a habit he had inherited from his mother. Catherine appeared in the doorway, holding a steaming mug of coffee and wearing the bemused expression that had become familiar whenever she discovered her husband and son in one of their working sessions. "The nursery has perfectly good toys," she observed, settling into the chair across from Alexander's desk. "Yes, but they don't come with Daddy's running commentary on international relations," Alexander replied with a grin. Marcus is becoming quite informed about trade agreements with the European Union. As if to prove his point, Marcus looked up and said, "Europe," with great satisfaction. Catherine laughed. "I stand corrected. How could I forget that our son is receiving a world-class education in geopolitics?" "Speaking of education," Alexander said, his tone becoming more serious, "I've been thinking about something." Catherine recognized the tone. Over their years together, she had learned that when Alexander used that particular voice, he was about to propose something that would likely challenge royal tradition. "What kind of something?" she asked. Alexander set down his pen and looked at both Catherine and Marcus, who had abandoned his blocks and was now attempting to climb into his father's lap. "Up, Dada," Marcus demanded, and Alexander automatically lifted him up, settling him comfortably on his knee. "I've been invited to speak at the International Conference on Child Development next month," Alexander began. "They want me to address how royal families can model healthy work-life balance for modern parents." Catherine nodded. "That sounds wonderful. Very much in line with what you've been trying to achieve. Here's the thing," Alexander continued, absently helping Marcus arrange some toy cars on the desk. "I want to take Marcus with me." "To a conference?" Catherine asked, raising an eyebrow. "Not to the actual speaking sessions, obviously. But I want to demonstrate that it's possible to be present for your child while still fulfilling professional obligations. The conference organizers have arranged childcare facilities, and there will be other attendees bringing their families." Marcus had found Alexander's letter opener and was examining it with scientific interest. Alexander gently replaced it with a safer toy, never breaking stride in the conversation. "The theme of my speech is going to be about redefining what it means to be a role model in the modern world," Alexander explained. "I want to argue that children need to see their parents as whole people, not just people who disappear to work and reappear at bedtime." Catherine considered this. "What would a typical day look like?" "I would attend morning sessions, spend midday with Marcus, do afternoon meetings, and then have family time in the evening, just like we do here, but in a conference setting." "And you think this would be helpful for other parents to see?" "I think it would be honest," Alexander said simply. "Too many fathers feel like they have to choose between career success and being present for their children. I want to show that it's possible to integrate both." Marcus, who had been listening to the conversation with his usual serious expression, suddenly looked up at Alexander and said, "Go with Dada." Both parents stared at him in surprise. "Did he just—" Catherine started. "I think he did," Alexander said, looking down at his son with amazement. "Marcus, do you want to go on a trip with Daddy?" "Go trip," Marcus said enthusiastically, clapping his hands. Catherine laughed. "Well, I think that settles it. But I'm coming too. This sounds too interesting to miss." 3 weeks later, The royal family arrived at the luxury hotel in Geneva that was hosting the International Conference on Child Development. Alexander had spent considerable time preparing his speech, but he was equally focused on demonstrating his principles through his actions during the three-day event. The morning of his keynote address, Alexander followed his usual routine. He woke early, spent an hour reviewing his notes while Marcus slept, and then had breakfast with his family in their hotel suite. Marcus was excited about the trip and kept asking when they would see new people. Very soon, Alexander promised, helping Marcus into a miniature suit that matched his own formal attire. Catherine had suggested that if Marcus was going to be part of a professional demonstration, he should look the part. The hotel's childcare facility was set up adjacent to the main conference rooms, with glass walls that allowed parents to see their children throughout the day. Alexander's plan was to deliver his morning keynote, spend lunch break with Marcus, attend afternoon sessions with other parents, and then participate in a panel discussion while Marcus napped. As they entered the conference area, Marcus held tightly to Alexander's hand, looking around at the bustling crowd with wide eyes. Several attendees recognized the royal family and approached to express their appreciation for Alexander's presence at the conference. Dr. Jennifer Williams, the conference organizer, greeted them warmly. "Your Royal Highness, we're so honored to have you here. And this must be Prince Marcus." Marcus, who had been coached on polite greetings, looked up at Dr. Williams and said clearly, "Hello, nice to meet you." Dr. Williams looked delighted. "Aren't you a proper young gentleman?" Alexander felt a surge of pride as he watched his son handle the introduction with confidence and charm. "Dr. Williams," Alexander said, "would it be possible for Marcus to sit in the back of the auditorium during my speech? He's quite good at entertaining himself quietly, and it would help illustrate my points about integration rather than separation." "Absolutely," Dr. Williams agreed. "We have some quiet activities set up specifically for children who attend sessions with their parents." An hour later, Alexander stood at the podium looking out at an audience of child development experts, parents, and policymakers from around the world. In the back corner of the room, he could see Marcus sitting with Catherine, quietly coloring in a book while occasionally looking up to wave at his father. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, 18 months ago, I made a decision that surprised my staff, my family, and, frankly, myself. I canceled a Commonwealth meeting because my infant son needed me more than the meeting did." He paused, looking directly at Marcus, who had stopped coloring and was watching his father with rapt attention. "That decision led me to fundamentally reconsider what it means to be a role model, not just as a public figure, but as a father. Today, I want to share what I've learned about the false choice between professional success and active parenting." Alexander spoke for 30 minutes about the practical changes he had made to his schedule, the resistance he had initially encountered, and the unexpected benefits that had emerged from prioritizing family integration over family separation. "My son," Alexander said, gesturing toward Marcus, "has attended state dinners, charity events, and official meetings. Not as a disruption, but as a reminder that the work we do in the world should ultimately serve the next generation." Marcus, hearing his name mentioned, waved enthusiastically at the audience, earning warm laughter and applause. "He has taught me that children don't need perfect parents," Alexander continued. "They need present parents. They need to see us as complete human beings who work hard, love deeply, and sometimes struggle to balance it all." During the lunch break, Alexander joined Marcus in the childcare area, where the toddler had made friends with several other children whose parents were attending the conference. Alexander found himself in conversations with fathers and mothers who shared their own struggles with work-life balance. "Seeing you here with your son gives me permission to do things differently," one father told him. "I always thought I had to leave my children at home to be taken seriously professionally." "The opposite is true," Alexander replied, watching as Marcus shared his toys with a shy little girl. "Bringing our children into appropriate professional spaces shows that we understand what really matters." That afternoon, Alexander attended a workshop on child psychology while Marcus napped in a nearby quiet room. Catherine sat with him, reading, while Alexander participated in discussions about early childhood development and parental attachment theory. The final day of the conference featured a panel discussion where Alexander was joined by other parents who had made significant changes to integrate family and career. As he prepared for the session, Marcus was playing in the childcare area, clearly comfortable in the environment and with the other children and families. "Your Royal Highness," Dr. Williams approached as Alexander prepared to join the panel. "I have to tell you, having Prince Marcus here has changed the entire dynamic of this conference. People are more relaxed, more open about their own parenting challenges." "That's exactly what I hoped would happen," Alexander said. "When we hide our children away, we perpetuate the myth that good parenting and professional success are incompatible." During the panel, Alexander spoke candidly about the challenges of royal duties and fatherhood, the criticism he had received for changing protocol, and the unexpected support that had emerged from both the public and his family. "The morning routine I established with my son has become the most important meeting of my day," he told the audience. "Everything else, every policy decision, every official engagement, flows from that foundation of family connection." A mother in the audience raised her hand. "Your Royal Highness, how do you handle criticism that suggests you're being unprofessional by prioritizing family time?" Alexander thought for a moment before responding. "I've learned that there's nothing more professional than being authentic about your values. My son will grow up knowing that he was my priority, not my obligation. That's the kind of leadership I want to model for the next generation." As the conference concluded, numerous attendees approached Alexander to thank him for his honesty and for bringing Marcus. The toddler had charmed everyone he met, but, more importantly, his presence had demonstrated that children could be integrated into professional environments in ways that enriched rather than disrupted the experience. On the flight home, Marcus fell asleep in Alexander's arms while Catherine reviewed the positive press coverage the conference had generated. "Listen to this," Catherine said, reading from her tablet. "Prince Alexander's approach to fatherhood is revolutionizing how we think about modern parenting and professional responsibility." Alexander looked down at his sleeping son, who was clutching a small wooden toy that one of the other children had given him as a farewell gift. "I think he enjoyed his first international conference," Alexander said softly. "I think he did more than enjoy it," Catherine replied. "I think he helped change some minds about what's possible when parents refuse to compartmentalize their love for their children." As their plane crossed over the English Channel, heading home to their life of royal duties balanced with family devotion, Alexander reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he had first canceled an official meeting to spend time with his infant son. Marcus stirred slightly in his sleep, and Alexander adjusted his hold to make sure his son remained comfortable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but it would also bring their morning routine in the sunny nursery, where the most important conversations of Alexander's day would continue to take place with a little boy who had taught him that being present was the greatest gift a parent could offer. The plane touched down at London as the sun was setting, and Alexander carried his sleeping son through the airport, confident that they had spent 3 days demonstrating that love and duty, family and profession could not only coexist but could strengthen each other in ways that would benefit generations to come. 3 months had passed since Prince Alexander established his new morning routine, and the royal household had adapted to what palace staff privately called the Marcus schedule. The young prince was now 9 months old, sitting up independently and showing a remarkable curiosity about everything around him. His bright eyes followed conversations, and he seemed particularly fascinated by his father's daily briefings, often reaching for documents with sticky fingers that Alexander had learned to keep just out of reach. On this particular Tuesday morning, Alexander sat cross-legged on the nursery floor, wearing casual trousers and a simple white shirt instead of his usual formal attire. Marcus was positioned in front of him, surrounded by colorful toys and board books, but his attention was focused entirely on his father's face as Alexander read aloud from a briefing about upcoming charity visits. "The Children's Hospital in Manchester is requesting a royal visit," Alexander explained to his son, who clapped his hands together with excitement. "They've opened a new wing for pediatric cancer treatment. Very important work." Marcus babbled something that sounded suspiciously like "dada," and Alexander's face lit up with pride. For weeks, Catherine and Alexander had been debating whether their son was actually saying his first word or just making sounds. But Alexander was convinced that Marcus was trying to communicate. Catherine entered the nursery carrying her morning coffee, dressed for the day in an elegant blue dress that complemented her eyes. She had a meeting with the Royal Foundation's Education Committee, but, like Alexander, she had learned to build her schedule around family time. "How are my two princes this morning?" she asked, settling onto the comfortable sofa that had been moved into the nursery specifically for these family gatherings. "Marcus and I were just discussing the Manchester hospital visit," Alexander replied seriously. "He seems very supportive of the idea." "Of course he does," Catherine laughed. "He agrees with everything you say. You're his favorite person in the entire world." As if to prove her point, Marcus began crawling determinedly toward Alexander, his chubby hands and knees moving across the soft carpet with impressive speed. When he reached his father, he pulled himself up using Alexander's shirt and looked expectantly up at him. "Up," Marcus said clearly, raising his arms. Both parents froze. This was definitely a word, not random babbling. "Did he just—" Catherine started. "Up," Marcus repeated, more insistently this time. Alexander scooped up his son, who immediately settled contentedly against his chest. "That's his second word," Alexander said with wonder. "After Dada." "I thought we agreed that Dada was still questionable," Catherine teased. "Nothing questionable about it. Our son is clearly advanced." Alexander tickled Marcus gently, earning a delighted giggle. Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "Your Royal Highness, I hate to interrupt family time, but there's been a development with the Manchester hospital visit." Alexander looked up, automatically shifting Marcus to his hip. Over the months, he had become expert at holding his son while conducting business. "What kind of development?" "The hospital's board has requested that you bring Prince Marcus for the visit. Apparently, the story of your changed priorities has been very well received by the public, and they believe having you there with your son would provide additional comfort to the young patients and their families." Catherine and Alexander exchanged glances. They had been extremely protective of Marcus's privacy, allowing only a few carefully controlled photo opportunities and avoiding public appearances with him. "What do you think?" Alexander asked Catherine. "He's still very young," Catherine said thoughtfully. "But if it would help other children. The hospital has assured us that they would provide a private room for feeding and nap times," Elizabeth added. "And the visit would be shorter than usual, just 2 hours instead of the typical half-day engagement." Marcus, who had been listening to the conversation with his usual serious expression, suddenly reached toward Elizabeth and said, "Up." Elizabeth's face broke into a smile. "I believe Prince Marcus is indicating his willingness to participate, Your Royal Highness." Alexander laughed. "I think you're right." He looked down at his son, who was now contentedly playing with the buttons on his shirt. "What do you say, Marcus? Want to help Daddy visit some other children who could use some cheering up?" Marcus looked up at his father and smiled, as if he understood exactly what was being asked of him. 2 weeks later, the royal car pulled up to Manchester Children's Hospital. Alexander emerged first, then turned to help Catherine, who was carrying Marcus in a soft blue outfit that matched his father's tie. The small crowd that had gathered outside the hospital burst into applause and warm calls of welcome. Marcus looked around at the crowd with wide eyes but showed no signs of distress. If anything, he seemed curious about all the new faces and sounds. "He's a natural," Catherine murmured to Alexander as they walked toward the hospital entrance. Inside, they were greeted by the hospital's chief administrator, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who had worked at the facility for over 20 years. She had specifically requested that the royal visit include Prince Marcus after reading about Alexander's commitment to hands-on fatherhood. "Your Royal Highnesses, thank you so much for coming," Dr. Mitchell said. "The children and families are absolutely thrilled that you're here." "Thank you for having us," Alexander replied. "We're honored to see the incredible work you're doing here." Dr. Mitchell led them through the hospital's bright, cheerfully decorated corridors. The new wing was designed specifically with children in mind, featuring colorful murals, comfortable family spaces, and play areas integrated throughout the treatment facilities. Their first stop was the infant ward, where babies and toddlers received treatment in an environment designed to feel as much like home as possible. Alexander was struck by how many of the young patients were Marcus's age or even younger. "This is Emma, Dr. Mitchell said, introducing them to a nurse holding a baby girl who appeared to be about 6 months old. "She's responding very well to treatment." Marcus immediately reached toward the baby, saying, "Up," and then making soft cooing sounds as if he was trying to communicate with her. "He seems to recognize that she's like him," the nurse observed with wonder. Alexander found himself deeply moved by the interaction. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward Emma. With careful coordination between the medical staff, Alexander held both Marcus and Emma for a few moments. Marcus gently patted the other baby's hand and made soft sounds that seemed almost protective. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Mitchell said quietly. "It's as if he understands that these children need extra care." As they moved through the ward, Marcus continued to interact gently with the young patients they met. He shared toys willingly, smiled at children who seemed sad, and remained calm and content throughout the visit despite being in an unfamiliar environment. In the playroom, they met 5-year-old James, who was undergoing treatment for leukemia but had maintained his enthusiastic personality throughout his treatment. James was immediately fascinated by Marcus. "Is he really a prince?" James asked Alexander seriously. "He is," Alexander replied, settling down on the floor so James could interact with Marcus more easily. "Just like you're really a superhero." James's face lit up. "How did you know I was a superhero?" "Because anyone who fights as hard as you do has to have superpowers," Alexander said simply. Marcus, sensing the importance of the moment, offered James one of his favorite toys, a soft stuffed dragon that he carried everywhere. James accepted it with reverence. "Can I hold him?" James asked. With careful supervision, James held Marcus while Alexander stayed close beside them. Marcus seemed completely comfortable with the older boy, even falling asleep briefly in James's arms. "He likes me," James whispered with awe. "He absolutely does," Catherine confirmed, capturing the moment with a few photos on her phone. After 2 hours, as planned, the royal family prepared to leave. Marcus had charmed everyone he met, from the medical staff to the young patients and their families. More importantly, his presence had brought smiles to faces that didn't smile often enough. Dr. Mitchell walked them to their car. "Your Royal Highness," she said to Alexander, "what you've done here today, bringing your son, showing these families that children are the priority, it means more than you can imagine." Alexander looked down at Marcus, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder, exhausted by the excitement of the day. "Thank you for letting us be part of your important work. We'll definitely be back." As their car pulled away from the hospital, Catherine turned to her husband. "That was incredible. Did you see how he interacted with those children?" Alexander nodded, still processing the emotional impact of the visit. "It's like he knew they needed extra kindness." "Maybe that's what we're really teaching him," Catherine mused. "Not just royal protocol or public duty, but genuine compassion." That evening, as Alexander gave Marcus his bath and prepared him for bed, he thought about the day's events. The little prince had handled his first official engagement with grace, kindness, and an intuitive understanding of what others needed from him. "You did beautifully today," Alexander told his son as he wrapped him in a soft towel. "You showed those children what it means to care about others." Marcus looked up at his father with sleepy eyes and said clearly, "Dada." Alexander smiled, holding his son close. "Yes, little prince. Dada is very proud of you." As he settled Marcus into his crib for the night, Alexander realized that his son was already teaching him as much about leadership and compassion as he was learning from royal tradition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities, but tonight, Alexander felt confident that he and Catherine were raising a boy who would grow up understanding that true nobility came from genuine care for others. Marcus fell asleep quickly, his small hand clutching the stuffed dragon that James had reluctantly returned at the end of their hospital visit. In his dreams, perhaps he was already planning his next opportunity to bring joy to children who needed it most. Prince Alexander stood at the tall windows of Kensington Palace, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens. In his arms, his 6-month-old son Marcus stirred gently, tiny fingers grasping at the golden buttons on his father's navy blazer. The weight of the child felt both substantial and fragile, a living reminder of how completely his world had changed since that snowy December morning when Marcus had arrived. "Your Royal Highness," came the soft voice of his private secretary, Elizabeth, from behind him. "The Commonwealth meeting begins in 30 minutes. Alexander turned slowly, careful not to disturb the sleeping infant. "Cancel it," he said quietly. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose slightly. In her 15 years of service to the royal family, she had never heard Prince Alexander cancel an official engagement. He was known throughout the palace for his unwavering dedication to duty, his punctuality, and his serious approach to royal responsibilities. "Sir, this is the quarterly meeting with the Commonwealth representatives. It's been scheduled for months." "I understand," Alexander replied, his voice gentle but firm. "Please extend my apologies and reschedule. Today, I am exactly where I need to be." Marcus opened his bright blue eyes and looked up at his father with the serious expression that had become familiar to everyone in the household. The baby rarely cried, but he watched everything with an intensity that seemed unusual for someone so young. Alexander smiled down at him, and, for the first time that morning, Marcus's face broke into a toothless grin. The transformation in Prince Alexander had been remarkable to witness. 6 months earlier, he had been known as the dutiful prince by the press, a man who approached his royal obligations with military precision. He attended every function, read every briefing, and maintained the perfect balance of approachability and royal dignity that had been drilled into him since childhood. His marriage to Lady Catherine had been a love match, unusual in royal circles, but, even then, Alexander had struggled to balance his personal happiness with the endless demands of royal life. Catherine often joked that she had to schedule appointments with her own husband between his official engagements. But Marcus had changed everything. The morning after his son's birth, Alexander had held the tiny infant in the hospital room and felt something shift fundamentally in his chest. All the training about duty to country and crown suddenly seemed secondary to this overwhelming need to protect and nurture this small person who depended completely on him. "Sir," Elizabeth tried again, "the Commonwealth representatives have traveled from quite far. Perhaps Her Royal Highness could attend in your place." Alexander looked down at Marcus, who had grabbed his finger and was studying it with scientific concentration. "Catherine is resting. She was up 3 times last night with feeding. Besides," he paused, considering his words carefully, "I'm learning that being present for my son is perhaps the most important duty I'll ever have." He walked to the comfortable armchair near the window and settled down with Marcus. The baby immediately became alert, looking around the familiar room with curiosity. Alexander had taken to conducting his morning routine in this nursery, finding that the peaceful atmosphere helped him think more clearly than any formal office ever had. "Elizabeth, please bring me the briefings for next week's engagements. I'll review them here." She hesitated. "In the nursery, sir?" "Yes. And please ask cook to prepare some tea. The Earl Grey that Catherine prefers." As Elizabeth left to carry out his instructions, Alexander began talking softly to Marcus about the day ahead. He had discovered that his son seemed to enjoy the sound of his voice, often becoming more alert and engaged when Alexander explained things to him, even though the conversations were decidedly one-sided. "Today we're supposed to meet with representatives from Australia, Canada, and New Zealand," Alexander told the infant. "They want to discuss economic partnerships and cultural exchange programs. Very important work, but not as important as making sure you feel loved and secure." Marcus made a small cooing sound, and Alexander interpreted it as agreement. The door opened quietly, and Catherine appeared in her dressing gown, her auburn hair still tousled from sleep. "I heard you canceled the Commonwealth meeting," she said, settling onto the arm of Alexander's chair. "Good news travels fast," Alexander replied, reaching up to take her hand. "The staff is buzzing about it. Apparently, Prince Alexander has never canceled anything in his entire life." Catherine leaned down to kiss the top of Marcus's head. "How is our little prince this morning?" "Perfectly content to discuss matters of state," Alexander said. "I think he has strong opinions about trade agreements." Catherine laughed, the sound filling the sunny room. "Well, he is a royal baby. Perhaps he inherited the diplomatic gene." "He inherited something much more important," Alexander said. looking between his wife and son. He inherited two parents who were determined to put his well-being above everything else. Catherine studied her husband's face. "Alex, talk to me. What's really going on? This isn't like you." Alexander was quiet for a moment, watching as Marcus reached toward a beam of sunlight streaming through the window. "Last night, when he woke up crying, I went to get him so you could sleep. I was holding him, walking around this room, and I realized something. All my life, I've been preparing to serve the country. Every lesson, every protocol, every public appearance has been about duty to the crown and the people." He paused, shifting Marcus to a more comfortable position. "But, holding him, I understood that my most important duty isn't to a country or a crown. It's to this little person, to be the father he deserves, to be present for the moments that matter." Catherine nodded slowly. "And the Commonwealth meeting will happen next week or the week after. But Marcus will only be 6 months old once. He'll only take his first steps once, say his first word once. I don't want to miss those moments because I was in a meeting room discussing trade policies." Elizabeth returned with a tea service and a thick folder of documents. As she set them down on the small table beside Alexander's chair, she noticed that the prince showed no inclination to put Marcus down or move to a more formal workspace. "Your Royal Highness," she said carefully, "I should mention that there are several photographers waiting outside the palace gates. Word of the cancelled meeting has already reached the press." Alexander looked up from his son, who was now contentedly chewing on the corner of a soft blanket. "What kind of photographers?" "The usual mix of royal correspondents and paparazzi. They seem quite interested in this change to your schedule." Catherine and Alexander exchanged glances. They had both grown up understanding that their private lives would always be of public interest, but they were still learning to navigate how much of their family life they wanted to share with the world. "What would you like me to tell them?" Elizabeth asked. Alexander considered the question while Marcus grabbed at his watch chain, a family heirloom passed down through generations of princes. "Tell them that Prince Alexander is spending the morning with his son, and that he couldn't be happier about it." Catherine smiled at her husband's response. "That's perfect. And, Elizabeth," Alexander added, "please make it clear that this isn't a one-time occurrence. My schedule will need to be adjusted to accommodate family time on a regular basis." Elizabeth made notes in her ever-present portfolio. "Certainly, sir. Shall I block out specific times each week?" "Every morning until 10, Alexander said without hesitation. "That's family time. No meetings, no calls, no official business unless it's a genuine emergency." As Elizabeth left to communicate these changes to the rest of the household staff, Catherine settled more comfortably beside her husband and son. The three of them sat together in the peaceful nursery, sunlight warming their faces as they began what would become a cherished daily tradition. Marcus had fallen back asleep, completely secure in his father's arms, while outside the palace walls, the world began to take notice that the dutiful Prince Alexander was writing a new chapter in what it meant to balance royal responsibility with the profound joy of fatherhood.